What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? D-backs on the active roster who have the most approved this season, and how is the closer role still up for grabs?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, MillardThomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by nothing, actually. We have no title sponsor for today's podcast, but always go check out FanDuel, and some of the other sponsors are going to be shouting out today. Typically, we have one, but I guess no one is sponsoring today's podcast. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. Now let's get into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss the D-backs players on the active roster who have the most to prove this upcoming season. On yesterday's podcast, we discussed the fringe dudes who might make the opening day roster, those guys who have the most to prove this year. But now we'll talk about guys who we know are guaranteed to be there opening day, assuming they don't get traded or anything like that, who have the biggest chip on their shoulder right now. And the first grouping I want to discuss, I'm going to cheat a little bit to start this topic. The back end of the rotation, they all have something to prove. I'm not throwing Brandon Pfaadt into this mix. For him, I think he's done enough in his career. I think he's on the right trajectory of development. Yes, do I want him to get better? Yes, but there's nothing that Brandon Pfaadt really has to prove to me. I've seen him on the big postseason stage. I've seen him for at least half a season be the best D-back starter. So for him, it's just more about showing that steady, positive trajectory of improving year after year, that developmental improvement year after year. So we want to see more of that from Brandon Pfaadt. But for the rest of the back end of the rotation, I think they all have a lot to prove this year. If you go one by one, Jordan Montgomery signed right before the start of opening day last year, coming off the World Series win against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Everyone thought you were going to be our biggest steal, our biggest X factor of the regular season as like our number 4, number 5 starter. And instead, Monty came into camp way too much out of shape, and he looked bad last year, right? He looked Madison Bumgarner bad. And so for him, there is a big shoulder on the chip of Jordan Montgomery, with D-backs fans ripping him, with his own owner of the D-backs going on radio saying that was a huge mistake by me. You could put the onus on my shoulders to blame. And so it's like he's being ridiculed, dragged through the coals, through the ownership, through the fans. No one is really in Jordan Montgomery's corner outside of his own, teammates and coaches, of course. But for Monty, coming off the pinnacle he was coming off of in 2023, winning the World Series, the fall from grace for Monty, where he was at worst considered like a number 2 starter in Major League Baseball, and now teams would rather pay terrible guys. We've seen this free agency, 15 to 20 plus million a year, instead of just trading for Jordan Montgomery and his expiring contract. So I think Monty has a lot to prove this regular season to reestablish himself as one of the best starting pitchers in the sport. Maybe not like a tier 1, but a guy good enough to be a frontline starter in a World Series winning rotation, right? So for Monty, coming to camp in shape, looking a lot better, all that he wants to prove to the outside world, especially D-backs fans who were really out on Monty last year. I think he has one of the best cases for a bounce back season in 2025. So we're all in on Jordan Montgomery, hoping he has a bounce back next year. Same with Erod. Everything we've just said about Jordan Montgomery, a lot of it could be placed on Erod as well. The only difference is Monty is an expiring contract, so his status within the D-backs organization. His foothold feels a little bit more shaky. A lot of discussion about him being traded. If we were to do a rotation, right, his spot doesn't exactly feel guaranteed. But for some reason, Erod's spot does feel guaranteed, despite being just as bad as Monty last year. The only difference is he has a contract with a few years remaining, paying him around $20 million a year. That's why he's locked into a rotation spot. But coming off the season he just had, no one is confident in Erod entering next year. He looked really good his final year in Detroit, but the issue that has plagued him his whole career has been his health, has been injuries. And again, last year was another season, 50 innings pitched due to poor health. And it's like, he wasn't that great when he was healthy. He's another guy that I would like to think can bounce back like Jordan Montgomery. I think he has a great case to be made that he should bounce back. The bounce back potential is there. D-backs rotation, if Monty and Erod look like their normal selves, that rotation definitely can be the best in the sport. But from what we saw in 2024, I don't have a great deal of confidence in Erod. That's why he has to have a big chip on his shoulder, because I don't think there's a lot of people confident in him and Jordan Montgomery coming off the seasons they just had. It left a really bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. So I think both of those guys have to have a big chip on their shoulder, because they're both getting paid around $20 million. Both guys have been considered like frontline starters in the past before, right? As recently as a couple years ago. So I think they both have a lot to prove in terms of reestablishing themselves as really good major league starters. And then the last guy in the back end of the rotation has something to prove is Ryan Nelson, who is coming off this season where he was the best D-back starter for the entire second half of the season. But there's still questions about how real it was, right? We still don't know if what Ryan Nelson did last year was replicable. And if we don't know, we still don't know if it was like a fluke one-year wonder or if Ryan Nelson is really building off something, because what we saw last year kind of gave us a glimpse into the future that maybe Ryan Nelson could be the D-backs number 3, number 4 starter going. You could have a rotation built around him and Brandon Pfaadt. Of course, we got Corbin Burns now locked in for the next few years. Like, maybe Ryan Nelson could be the number 3, number 4 starter in that mix. It really just depends if what he did last year was true or not, right? Was it a fluke, or was that second half of Ryan Nelson where his command looked really good? That fastball velocity started ticking up, but the location and the precision of where he wanted to do it was really good, keeping hitters off balance. Like, everything he did in the second half last year, the numbers would tell you this is a guy that could be a number 3 starter in the rotation. We just need to know, was it a one-year wonder, or was that something we could bet on Ryan Nelson moving forward? If we went with a rotation right now, Ryan Nelson feels like the 6th or 7th guy in the rotation. And considering he was the best starter for the D-backs for like 12 starts last year, I think he has to have a chip on his shoulder, because you can't be the best starter for the second half of the season, go into the next season and then be like, am I the odd man out of a 6-7 man rotation? Like, it's crazy to think about. So I think every D-back starter in the back end of the rotation from last year should have a big chip on their shoulder entering 2025. Now we got a couple more guys I want to discuss that should have big chips on their shoulder, and we'll discuss that in segment number 2. But hey, if you guys are thinking about grabbing a go-to snack, then I suggest getting yourself a bag of wonderful pistachios, because if you're looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious, crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love all the variety packs Wonderful Pistachios has, because recently they sent a fat box to my apartment. I got like the roasted chili, I got lightly salted, I got pistachios with shells, without shells. Then I gotta say, I'm eating pistachios for breakfast, lunch, and dinner at this point, because they're addicting and they're healthy for you. So I suggest you get snacking, you get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And I got a few more guys from the D-backs active roster that I think have something to prove. They should have a chip on their shoulder entering next season. The next guy I want to discuss is Josh Naylor. I think the case for him is super obvious. Christian Walker. It's kind of basically the whole Christian Walker case all over again, because Christian Walker came into a situation where we had Paul Goldschmidt for multiple seasons, face of the franchise, future Hall of Famer, right? All-star every year, power hitter, arguably the best defensive first baseman as well, even a little bit of speed. And so it's like, when you look at the shoes Christian Walker had to fill, this was the best D-backs player probably like the last 10 years. And so the pressure on Walker's shoulders was massive, considering it felt like we traded Paul Goldschmidt when we did not have to. And now Christian Walker leaves in free agency for a contract where it feels like the D-backs could have re-signed him, right? 3 years, like $60 million for Christian Walker, a guy who's won the Gold Glove every single year, 30 home run potential, 100 RBI potential. Like, he does everything you want a first baseman to do. We let that guy walk in free agency. We trade for someone new in Josh Naylor, and now he has to go replace his shoes. The man who already replaced the shoes of a future Hall of Famer, face of the franchise. Like, that's a large shadow to step into if you're Josh Naylor. And the fact that he's 27 years old, still ascending, coming off the best season of his career in terms of power output. I really like Josh Naylor this season as a guy that could be an instant fan favorite. If opening week he has a couple bombs, I think people are going to be like, man, we miss Christian Walker, but look at this new young fresh blood that we now have in the D-backs lineup. So for Josh Naylor, he does have something to prove. I don't think he wants to go out there exerting extra pressure on himself, but he knows the situation he's stepping into. He knows Christian Walker has been a fan favorite, a beast, a steady contributor the last couple of seasons. So there is definitely something to prove with Josh Naylor, and I'm super excited to see what he does in a D-backs uniform in 2025. Next up, I think there's some pressure on Pavin Smith. You look at what Pavin Smith did last year. Small sample size, but in 60 games, he had an 896 OPS. He had 9 home runs. And if you extrapolate that over the course of a full season, it would have definitely been a year where you could justify playing Pavin Smith for at least 120 games in your DH role if what he did was replicable over a full season, right? Well, that's kind of what the D-backs are betting on 2025, because you're okay letting Jock Peterson walk. It took you a while to bring back Randall Grichuk. Like, the D-backs are kind of betting that what we saw from last year from Pavin Smith was replicable. And I think for a lot of D-backs fans, we still kind of feel like it was a small sample size for Pavin Smith, right? We saw 4 prior years of Pavin Smith being a very non-factor offensively with some of the worst defense we've ever seen. And now you're telling us he's just going to step into Jock Peterson's role from last year and just hopefully take on that mantle and continue what he did. I think there's a lot of pressure potentially on Pavin Smith, and that's why he definitely has something to prove. D-backs are giving you the leash to not be a first baseman, not be an outfielder, but just go out there, play DH against right-handed pitchers and see what you can do. This is the best situation for you if you're Pavin Smith, because we know defensively you can't really do anything. We know you're not very good against the left-handed pitching. This is a situation set up for you to really prosper, and if it does not happen, I imagine Pavin Smith won't be in a D-backs uniform too much longer. So definitely a lot to prove for Pavin Smith this season when you're replacing a guy like Jock Peterson, who was a fan favorite, and he's coming off a monster year as well. And then how about the rookie of the year from 2023, Corbin Carroll? I think there's a lot of pressure on Corbin Carroll. You win rookie of the year, top 5 in MVP voting, you go to the World Series. Everyone thinks you're going to be the next franchise star. Maybe you already are. People think you're going to be like one of the faces of the sport. You enter 2024 and you just have a down year. Your first half of the season last year was straight up bad. You ended up, really making up for it. Like, when you really look at the numbers, he had 4 more triples than he had in 2023. He only finished with 3 less home runs, 2 less RBIs. It was really like the average and like the OPS and the steals, but a lot of the traditional counting numbers he was at least able to make up in the second half of the year and still finish with a 3.5 WAR. But I think what we need to see is, are you the guy who's a superstar, face of the franchise MVP candidate like we saw your rookie of the year? Or you guy who, just had a great rookie season and you're still a stud player, but maybe you're not like the consistent year-to-year MVP that we thought. I still believe Corbin Carroll is a top 10 MVP go-getter for like the next decade, but we've seen guys like Andrew Benintendi come out, have a fantastic rookie season where people think you're going to continue to ascend, continue to be one of the best players at your position, and then you just fizzle out. We've seen it happen in the sport. Guys get off to hot starts, and then we look up and we say, man, it's been a few years later, and they haven't really been able to recapture the magic that they had as a rookie or their first couple years in the league. I'm not saying that's going to happen to Corbin Carroll, but that's why he does have a little bit of something to prove this upcoming season. Show to everyone that the rookie of the year that we saw, that top 5 MVP go-getter, that was only the beginning, because the last year was disappointing. But what we saw from the second half, I think there's definitely a level that Corbin Carroll tapped into last year, that if he can parlay that into this upcoming season, if he could take the second half of 2024 and just extrapolate that over the course of a full season in 2025, that is a guy that could definitely win an MVP over the next few years. Now, the final guy I want to discuss before we head into segment number 3 is a little Justin Martinez. And he has more to prove this spring training than the regular season, because as we're going to discuss in segment number 3, the closer role still seems to be up for grab for the Arizona Diamondbacks. And considering Justin Martinez was 2.48 ERA last year, strikeout machine, can throw as hard as anyone in the sport, he doesn't have a lot to prove to himself in the regular season, but for at least spring training and camp, it seems like he has to still go out there and go win the job, which I don't understand. And that's what we're going to discuss in segment number 3. How is this closer role still up for jobs? How has Justin Martinez not won it yet? That's what we're going to discuss after this quick message. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel is the app that is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. Whenever the Suns are playing, give me KD over on 25 points, give me Booker over on 25, and give me the Suns money line. When it hits, which is not very often, it brings a big smile to my face. If you want a big smile on your face, just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and just want to discuss, because we got some comments from Mike Hazen at the start of spring training, and he discussed how the closer role is still open. He still wants to add someone this offseason. We're still debating Martinez, Puck, Kevin Ginkel, and I just want to know, how is it still a debate? What more does Justin Martinez need to do to earn himself this closer role? We went through this charade last season when it was like, who should be the D-backs closer with Paul Sewald out, and we tried Ginkel, we tried Ryan Thompson, we were trying guy after guy, and guess what? None of those players were good. It was not working out until we put Justin Martinez in that role. We tried so many guys in the back end of the bullpen for the D-backs last year with Sewald out, and all of them were disappointing. All of them were disappointing. All of them really struggled. The only guy who was able to get any level of consistency for the D-backs as a closer last year was Justin Martinez. I really like Kevin Ginkel, but history has shown us whenever we have tried to make him the closer for whatever reason, he is just not comfortable in those situations. And like you look at his numbers from last year in save situations, Kevin Ginkel 5.14 ERA. Guess what? In non-save situations, Kevin Ginkel had a 1.94 ERA. Like, he is one of the best relievers in the sport when he doesn't have to close games, and one of the worst when he does. And the same could be said for a couple other players on this D-backs team. Ryan Thompson in saves at a 5.4 ERA. Ryan Thompson in non-save situations at a 3.48 ERA. He was much better in non-save situations as opposed to save situations as well, because Ryan Thompson, like Kevin Ginkel, is a setup man. Some dudes, when the pressure is the greatest, when you know you're 3 outs away, it's like a mental block for them. They just can't get over it. The pressure, either they're putting it on themselves or they just get like out of body for some reason. But like Ginkel never seems comfortable whenever he had to step in as the closer replacement. Same with Ryan Thompson. Like, I have the utmost trust in those guys. If it's 2 outs, if it's bases loaded, and those guys are coming in to get us out the jam in the 7th inning, in the 8th inning, I have the utmost confidence in Ginkel or Ryan Thompson. But in the 9th inning, I do not. And Justin Martinez, I thought, took over that role last year. Outside of AJ Puck, he's the only other guy who I would even consider in this D-backs bullpen right now, seriously, for the D-backs closer role. With how he pitched last year, Puck should be the only guy, but Justin Martinez has like the perfect kind of arsenal to be the D-backs closer. And it's like, I don't know why the D-backs are like so afraid to just commit to him full time and just say, Justin Martinez, you're our guy. I don't like the committee approach. I think it's way easier for bullpens when they know what role they're going to have. Like, I'm a traditionalist in saying, you're going to be the closer, you're going to be the setup man, you're going to be this, you're going to be that. Like, I think defining roles for everyone makes it so much easier. And it's like, for Justin Martinez, his split finger had a sub 100 average. He has a fastball that averaged over 100, a sinker that averaged over 100. Like, the stuff is there. We know that for Justin Martinez. It's like, what more do you need to see internally from the Ginkles and the Ryan Thompsons? You've seen enough on the major league level to know those guys just aren't good enough for you as a closer, at least. And from Justin Martinez, he showed you last year, you give him a chance and he can run with that role. So I just don't understand why there just seems to be such a lack of commitment to just giving the job to Justin Martinez when he has flat out been the best in that position and he has the best stuff. He's the most talented. It just makes the most sense. Now, I will say, if Justin Martinez ever got hurt, I think there's a couple of fun options that the D-backs can go in the closer role internally. That's not Ginkel, Puck, or Ryan Thompson. A guy that we've discussed as a fringe active roster opening day guy that has a lot to prove. On yesterday's podcast, Dre Jameson, who is looking to be ready by opening day. He is a guy, when I look at what he was doing prior to his injury, the stuff that Dre Jameson has, I think is ready-made for a back-end bullpen. He is very much like a Justin Martinez, 95 on his sinker, 97 on his fastball, kind of like the same kind of like almost pitching arsenal, throws it super hard as well. Like, I think Dre Jameson could be like a nice facsimile of Justin Martinez if he ever got hurt, or if the D-backs wanted like a sneaky option that could potentially be the closer down the road. I think Dre Jameson is an interesting candidate. I would like to see him in the bullpen. I think the kind of stuff he has is tailor-made for a high leverage reliever role, and the D-backs are talking about still going out there and adding one. Maybe that option that you want is internally. I think the other guy that could be sneaky fun for a potential closer role is a guy who just doesn't really have a spot in the rotation because it's so loaded. But Ryan Nelson, it's insane to think your best starter from a year ago should be your closer. But Ryan Nelson, the kind of pitcher he is, like you look at his breakdown from last year, still 55% of the time he's throwing that four-seam fastball. And if he's not throwing that, 80% of the time he's throwing a cutter. Like he wants to throw something hard. I think a four-seamer with a cutter as your two go-to pitches, throwing in a little changeup every now and then. I think he's got the kind of arsenal to be a closer. He wants to be fastball heavy. Like you could do that as a closer. Just go out there, pound the strike zone. Make sure you don't leave any meatballs. Make sure you don't walk guys. I think Ryan Nelson, with what he did last year in the second half of the season, he kind of showed that he could either be a starter, or I do think he has the kind of arsenal to be a very good high leverage reliever as well. So I do think Ryan Nelson and Dre Jameson are two guys that do intrigue me if the D-backs ever want to go in that direction as high leverage relievers. But if the D-backs still want to add someone from free agency, we're getting kind of late. A lot of guys have been picked up, and I think at this point you're looking at like David Robertson or bust. I think he's by far the best candidate that's still out there. Yes, he's old. Yes, he's 40, but still a strikeout machine and still had a dominant season with the Texas Rangers last year. So if the D-backs were going to pick up a free agent reliever, I pray it's David Robertson. Now that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Toss it.